started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to our online No to NATO, Yes to Peace protest. Thank you for tuning in. Today's topic is militarism's racism and violence at home and abroad. And I am so excited to have Margaret, Elle, and Tamara, and also one of our new team members on the VOW team, Ashwini, who are going to be speaking today about a range of topics. We have moved our protests online as it has become safer to do so, but because of that, we are able to reach so many people across Canada, the United States, and the world. I just see in the chat somebody is here from New Zealand, so that's wonderful. So my name is Vanessa Lantain, and I am the National Coordinator for the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and I am excited to be hosting this month's webinar where we have longtime member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, Tamara Lawrence, as my co-host, two guest speakers, Margaret Kimberley and Elle Jones, and Ashwini, a new member of our team. From our incredible speakers today, we will learn about the racism and violence of militarization at home and abroad, as well as the growing presence of NATO and US AFRICOM on the African continent and how that undermines peace and development. We will learn more about Canada's involvement in US AFRICOM and how Canada's operations with the NATO are threatening conflict with other countries. We will make links between police brutality on our streets and war around the world and share ways we can resist militarism and raise our voices for peace, nonviolence, and global solidarity. So just a few housekeeping issues. Please make sure you are muted and please post any questions or comments in the chat box. I will do my best to keep note and then we can come back to them at the Q&A at the end of the discussion. If we do get any Zoom bombers, just in case, we will send out another link through our registration list so that we can continue, although we hope that everyone on the call will be respectful. And let me just make sure that, yes, we are recording, so we will be able to post this afterwards in case any of our friends are not able to make it. So I want to start with a land acknowledgement. The lands I'm currently on are on the unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation in what is now called British Columbia. I just want to post this in the chat right now. If you are unsure of where you are on native land, I've just posted a link in the chat where you can actually see which nation's land you are currently on. So just if you are interested, please take a look. It is very important because if you do not know where you are coming from and where you're going, you need to be able to share knowledge and where the holes are and fill those holes with peace. So I would like to hand it over to my co-host now, who will be talking about NATO. But just before that, I just want to say a few words about VOW. The Canadian Voice of Women for Peace is an organization who is celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. We have chapters all across Canada. We are a membership-based organization, so any donations or support that you can offer at this time, we really appreciate it, as we have had to do some interesting translation of our work to our online virtual sphere instead of our in-person fundraising. We have quite a few campaigns going on right now that we will talk about afterwards. But one of the things that we are currently working on right now is our peace camps. We are hosting a virtual intergenerational peace camp with a strong youth focus, and that is going to be happening in just 1 month's time from now in August. And we also have current campaigns on the fighter jets. We have a National Day of Action coming on tomorrow, which we will talk more about at the end. And then we also have a campaign against RIMPAC, which is Rim of the Pacific. It's the largest maritime war exercise in the world, and we have a current petition on that as well. So more to come on that, but I am excited to introduce our first speaker, Tamara Lawrence.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you all on this webinar, and it's so fantastic to be with Elle and Margaret, awesome peace activists. This is going to be a fantastic evening. So I'm Tamara Lawrence. I'm in Waterloo, Ontario. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the neutral peoples of the Grand River. I am going to give a 10-minute presentation, and then I'm going to be followed by Margaret and then Elle, and then we're going to have a question and answer period, and we're going to close with some upcoming events. But over the time that I have, I'd like to talk to you about why the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, VOW, is opposed to NATO and how we're trying to resist and overcome this militarism. So I'm going to share some slides with you, and I'm just going to get that up now. So I'd like to begin with some important recent history. This year is the 30th anniversary of the Oka crisis. In 1990, the Mohawk people of Quebec organized a blockade to prevent an expansion of a golf course that was being built on their ancestral territory. There was a 78-day standoff that summer. The government of Canada issued the largest domestic deployment of the military. Over 4,000 heavily armed soldiers and tanks and other material confronted the Mohawk people. This is an example of the racism and violence at home. This year is also the 27th anniversary of the Somalia affair. In 1993, Canadian soldiers on a so-called humanitarian mission to Somalia beat to death a Somali teen. The subsequent inquiry found that Canadian soldiers engaged in racist violence and discreditable conduct. This is an example of Canada's racist militarism abroad. 9 years ago, Canada led the NATO bombing of Libya. It was a Canadian general, Charles Bouchard, that conducted that NATO operation in 2011. Thousands of bombs were dropped on that country, destroying infrastructure and killing people. Libya was one of the richest countries. Libya helped fund and founded the African Union. Gaddafi was a respected leader for many Africans. NATO with the Canada with the United States and NATO allies totally destroyed and destabilized Libya, which led to a humanitarian and refugee crisis across North Africa that continues to exist today. Canada has been partnering with US AFRICOM on the African continent for many years. For the past 10 years, Canadian Special Forces from Petawawa conducted counterinsurgency training exercises with AFRICOM in West Africa. It's called Operation Flintock, and it's being led by the United States, and it's considered the largest annual special operations forces. It's a 2-week exercise, and it happens every year. This is a tweet from the exercise this past February. So you can, just think for a moment that Canada, the United States, US AFRICOM were exercising for counterinsurgency, just as the pandemic was starting to spread and to worsen. Canada is also engaged with US AFRICOM's annual naval exercise. It's called Cutlass Express. It's an annual exercise that happens in West Africa. This is a tweet from 2017, and you can see that US AFRICOM is congratulating Canada for partnering on this maritime war exercise. Since 2005, NATO has been working and militarizing Africa. NATO established a liaison office at the Africa Union headquarters in Ethiopia. Last November, NATO signed a new agreement with the African Union. So the United States, AFRICOM, NATO, they're militarizing the continent. You know, this is a racist and violent project, but Africa, you know, has been working to be a zone of peace. Africa is a nuclear weapons-free zone. In 1996, African countries signed the Treaty of Pelindaba to prevent any nuclear weapons from being on their territory. 5 African countries have already signed and ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I mean, this is a treaty that Canada hasn't even signed yet. So we need to resist what NATO is doing and what US AFRICOM is doing. The Canadian Voice of Women for Peace partnered with Black Alliance for Peace and other organizations last year in the No to NATO 2019 mobilization. We organized many rallies and protests and events in the United States, in Canada, and the UK last year. Last year as well, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace launched a campaign, Feminists Against Militarism, Women Say No to NATO, and you can see our fantastic signs and banners there that we take all over with us. Last year, every month for NATO's 70th anniversary, VOW held a protest, and you can see our signs, and we interacted with the public and let them know how opposed we are to NATO, and we started to get interest and bigger participation. It was really great. This year we were going to continue to protest outside the NATO Association of Canada office, but of course with the pandemic, you know, we've had to move our protest online, as Vanessa explained, and have these webinars. But in some ways this is really fantastic because we can have great speakers like Elle and Margaret join us. So I'd like to tell you a little bit specifically why the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace is opposed to NATO. It's an aggressive military alliance. Like I explained, it's been engaged in many illegal interventions in Yugoslavia, Libya, Afghanistan. It relies on a dangerous nuclear deterrence. It's because of Canada's participation and membership in NATO that we are not signing on to this crucial new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It puts intense pressure on its member countries like Canada to increase military spending. There's a target that all NATO members need to increase military spending by 2% of GDP by 2024. NATO has terrible adverse impacts on the environment and the climate. VOW believes that NATO is weaponizing the UN Women, Peace and Security agenda. NATO very much undermines the United Nations. NATO is a war machine. It's militarizing the world. And NATO cannot be reformed. It needs to be abolished. I just want to mention, I just want to show you this picture of NATO's founding. From its inception, NATO has been a racist neo-colonial project. It is also the ultimate expression of white supremacist violence. If you look at this picture, you can see the founding members of NATO, the NATO leaders signing the North Atlantic Treaty in 1949. There were 12 Western powers, all led by men, that founded this military alliance. And if you think about them, like the US, the UK, France, Belgium, Portugal, and the Netherlands, they had, you know, brutal colonies where they you know, victimized Black and brown people around the world. And then if you think of a country like Canada and the United States, you know, brutalizing our Indigenous peoples. So every year, NATO has a conference in Canada. It's called the Halifax International Security Forum. It takes place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and every year the Nova Scotia Voice of Women for Peace protests this conference outside the conference center. And there you can see a picture of our members holding our sign: demilitarize, decarbonize, stop the wars, stop the warming. And every year, she protests and speaks and performs at these protests, and she's always gives such a powerful message. So there's a picture from her from last year. And last year, Margaret came to Halifax and protested as well, the NATO conference. So it was so fantastic to have her. And there was a great write-up by a journalist in Halifax named Robert Devitt with the Nova Scotia Advocate, and he has a great article about this this peace rally, and you can see these photos and read more about it. I want to bring to your attention a terrible development. Last month, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that NATO has a new campaign called NATO 30. It's a project to expand militarily and politically NATO. This is really terrible development, and we need everybody to help resist this, because there is no way for us to meet the Paris climate targets by 2030 or the UN Sustainable Development targets by 2030 if NATO expands, because it's militarizing. It's militarizing countries. It's diverting precious resources that we need for human development into weapons and war, and we need to stop this. I wrote an article last December. It's available online. We'll send it in our follow-up email to everybody, how NATO is the greatest threat to the climate, and I'm happy to talk about this more in the discussion. There are peaceful alternatives to NATO. We don't need NATO. We have international law. We have international institutions like the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and many other organizations. So NATO is not necessary. We need to get rid of it. BOW is working with partners like Black Alliance for Peace, like the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and the Regina Peace Council and many other peace organizations across Canada and around the world. We're also part of the Node to NATO International Network, and we are trying to build a national and international movement against NATO, and we really hope that you will join us so we can talk together in the Q&A about ways that we can take action. And then these are some resources that I will share with you when the slides get sent to you in the follow-up email. Again, we're so happy that you've all joined us for this important discussion, and I am so looking forward to hearing from Margaret and from Elle. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Tamara. It's always so wonderful to hear you speak. And I see in the chat, Macmillan says, thank you for your endless energy and enthusiasm. And I have to second that. I love the way that you said that militarization is diverting public resources. So I hear a lot about how we need to divert money from the military to public services, but we have to understand that the militarization of our whole economy is the one that is diverting resources from things that we need to have support us. So that was so wonderful. Thank you, Tamara, for speaking with us today. And I am so excited to introduce our next featured speaker, which is Margaret Kimberley. So Margaret is a co-founder and editor and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report. She is the author of the book Prejudential: Black America and the Presidents. She is also a contributor to the anthologies In Defense of Julian Assange and Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence. Her work has appeared in Counterpunch, Consortium News, Common Dreams, and the American Herald Tribune. Ms. Kimberley is an administrative committee member of the United National Anti-War Coalition and the coordinating committee of Black Alliance for Peace. And we are so honored that she could come and speak with us today. So I'm going to hand it over to her now.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone. Good evening. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for inviting me, Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I love visiting Canada. I went twice last year, yes, including going to Halifax. But now, thanks to the American response to COVID-19, I can't even go just north of New York State to Canada. But thank God for the technology, and I can see my comrades and friends. And I say that even to people I've never met before, because those of us who oppose imperialism and who in effect become dissidents in our country are all comrades, whether we've met or not. I love to talk about, have opportunities to talk about international solidarity. And I think that's especially important for Canadians and USians. I hate to say American because everybody in this hemisphere is an American, but at any rate. And it's funny because here in the United States, so many people have misapprehensions about Canada and think it's more progressive than it actually is. Our country is so backward, so reactionary, so retrograde that we sometimes give credit where it is not due. For example, we have a terrible for-profit healthcare system, and the COVID-19 death toll proves it, and the terrible response to the pandemic proves it. So Americans know that Canada has healthcare for all, and so we see it as some sort of nirvana, but it isn't. Canada is like other members of NATO and the G7 and the EU and that entire axis. Canada is a US vassal state and a partner, I'm going to say a partner in crime. It's a puppet government without independence, and Prime Minister Trudeau or whomever your leaders are do whatever its patron to the south directs it to do. It was funny to me when Trudeau was caught on a hot mic. He didn't know his microphone was on, and he was in a conversation with Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron, and they were criticizing Trump. It was a bit like kids in high school talking about the other kid they didn't like who was outside of their clique. But it doesn't matter how he feels about him personally. When, I'll give you an example, when the US told Canada to arrest Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of Huawei's founder, they did just that. Instead of refusing the American request to arrest and extradite her to the US, the US made this spurious claim that Huawei violated US sanctions toward Iran, and they should have told the US no, but just the opposite happened. Canada said yes. China promptly retaliated and arrested 2 Canadians who are still in custody more than a year later. And Trudeau still defends the extradition effort, just like the puppet that he is. So these formations, NATO, the EU, the G7, are all, they're muscle. You know, we should stop giving these leaders and these governments any credit. They're gangsters to me. And as far as I'm concerned, they are the muscle for the big gangster, the US. They were never benevolent. And since the fall of the Soviet Union nearly 30 years ago, they have committed themselves more and more to following the dictates of the US, which is a hegemon. So as Tamara just said, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was founded in 1949. It was said to be the counterpoint to the Soviet Union and its allies. But in the last 30 years, the former Warsaw Pact countries have all joined NATO. So what purpose does it serve? It was, as she said, the NATO countries which joined together to dismember the former Yugoslavia and break it up into smaller countries. It's NATO which led the attack on Libya in 2011 and destroyed a sovereign nation. and turned it into a hellscape for its Black and African population, and a slave state snatching up Africans attempting to migrate to Europe. And it's NATO that attempted to do the same thing in Syria, and now joins the US in punishing that country with sanctions that quite literally caused death from hunger and lack of medical care. I want to give a brief word about sanctions. You know, I don't know how many, perhaps I'm preaching to the choir here, but people seem to think that if a country, generally the US or its allies, sanction another country, that means the US, that country won't do business with that other nation. But the US demands that its targets be blockaded by the rest of the world too. If any nation seeks trade or financial transactions with targets such as Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Syria, Iran, Zimbabwe, and more nations, they too face economic strangulation. So US sanctions are in fact international sanctions. And we know for a fact that 60,000 Venezuelans have died because their country cannot get access to perform financial transactions with the rest of the world. And Canada joins with the rest of NATO and the EU in these aggressions wholeheartedly. When the US told Canada that it was going to choose a new president for Venezuela, Canada went along and became a member of this phony group, the Lima Group, which takes a prominent position in undoing the will of the Venezuelan people and violating international law. Lima Group was founded in Lima, Peru, with the stated goal of resolving Venezuela's economic crisis. Of course, sanctions are the cause of all of Venezuela's crises, but these agreements and treaties are for show. And they are meant to give the impression that democracy is being served in these acts of war by other means. If anyone doubts that the Lima Group is phony, remember that they denied media accreditation to the Russian-based network Sputnik and Ecuadorian-based Telesur for a meeting held in Ottawa last year. I'm assuming you all know about the term the Five Eyes. Sounds like a horror movie. I guess it is. Referring to the intelligence agencies of the UK and its settler colonial offshoots. The UK, Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand comprise the Five Eyes, and they work very closely together to maintain their control and over their allies as well. And of course, propaganda plays a big part in what they do. In July 2019, the UK and Canada sponsored a press freedom conference in London. And it's ironic, this was just a few months after they denied access to Sputnik and Telesur. And it also took place after the UK arrested Julian Assange, who at that time was sitting in a London prison while leaders made claims about press freedom. That year, 2019, I and others, the Black Alliance for Peace and other groups, joined a protest in Washington where the 50th anniversary of NATO was being commemorated. And a little about Black Alliance for Peace. We founded Black Alliance for Peace on April 4th, 2017, which is a very significant date. On April 4th, 1967, Martin Luther King gave the speech that should be the most famous. It was called Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. And in those remarks, he publicly broke with President Johnson on the issue of the Vietnam War. And this was huge. King clearly stated that justice and equity cannot coexist with militarism. 1 year later to the day he was assassinated, and it's clear to anybody paying attention that his words in 1967 led to his death in 1968. So I hope you'll take a look at the Black Alliance for Peace website. Thank you, Elle, for helping me out here. I'm challenged. That is our fact sheet on AFRICOM, the US Africa Command. Black Alliance for Peace, I'll just read our mission, seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. through educational activities, organizing, and movement support. Organizations and individuals in the Alliance work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the US state globally. Since our founding, BAP, I'm just gonna say BAP instead of Black Alliance for Peace, has organized people here in the US and internationally. I hope you saw it, and if you didn't, find the time to watch our June 16th webinar, which was called Rise Up to Shut Down AFRICOM. June 16th is Soweto Day, the anniversary of the Soweto uprising, and we thought it was a perfect moment to gather an international group to talk about the need to rid the world of US imperialist influence, especially as it impacts African peoples all over the world. The US Africa Command, known as AFRICOM, is just the latest manifestation of US empire building. The US has divided up the world into what it calls areas of responsibility. There is a US NORTHCOM, a US SOUTHCOM, US PATCOM, US EUCOM, US CENTCOM, and AFRICOM, the last of which was founded in 2008 at the end of Bush's term. But it came into full realization during the Obama administration. Egypt is in US CENTCOM, but the rest of the continent is covered by AFRICOM, which is based in Germany. Only Eritrea, one African nation, is outside of AFRICOM influence. There are some 40 bases or facilities of various types in Africa, with the US and France being the countries that have the largest military presence. This means that these nations lack sovereignty, and people in these countries lack sovereignty. Even if they have elections, they don't really have democracy if their rulers are in cahoots with the United States. Our latest organizing campaign is No Compromise, No Retreat, Defeat the War Against Black African People in the US and abroad. And yes, that's a mouthful, but we thought it was important to express our political orientation as fully as we possibly could. And among our campaign demands are the closing of all US NATO foreign military bases. There are at least 800 of them around the world. We want to cut the military budget in half, end the 1033 Defense Department program, which gives surplus military equipment to local police departments, and the investigation of all fatal police encounters, and of course, shutting down AFRICOM. Our goals are to engage with Congress and other elected officials through our candidate pledge form, wherein candidates commit themselves to agreeing to our demands. And we can see the importance of this campaign through recent events in the US. Ever since George Floyd was killed by police on May 25th, a series of protests erupted around the country and throughout the world, the largest and most diverse going back decades. The combination of the COVID pandemic and the US response has resulted in the loss of life, 130,000 people, unemployment for more than 30 million people, and inadequate government support. Lately, we've seen the city of Portland, Oregon has been in the news as the Federal Department of Homeland Security sent its own police force, including the Border Patrol, to stop a rather small but enduring action in that city, which was focused on graffiti on a federal courthouse. But Trump has been itching to send federal cops into demonstrations, and this was his big moment. And it was at the very least unsettling to see people pulled off the street and held without charge, although as far as we know, these detentions have been brief so far. But it's important not to just focus on Trump, but on the system. Barack Obama gave legitimacy, if not legality, to these acts. He signed the annual NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, and in 2011, it included a provision allowing for the detention without charge of US citizens thought to be terrorists, even on American soil. So this gave his successor carte blanche to do the same thing. It's quite bipartisan, the imperialist effort and the police state effort. But Trump, we have to be careful with Trump because it's so easy to denounce him. But in 2016, during his campaign, he called NATO obsolete. Now, no one knew what that meant. It didn't make him the peace candidate. He just meant that NATO nations needed to spend more money for their military. That's all. And they have done so, even, as I said, as they gripe behind Trump's back. So we can see that everything King said on April 4th, 1967 is true. We can't separate the domestic from the international. Governments that practice aggressions abroad will do so at home. But so millions of people were rightly outraged to see George Floyd killed, but 1,000 people are killed by the police every year. This week we've seen collusion, hot word in the US, between the two major parties, the military-industrial complex and domestic repression. A congressional vote failed that would have cut our enormous military budget by a mere 10%. Military spending in the US takes up 60% of our budget. But even the House of Representatives, which is controlled by Democrats who are supposedly in opposition to Trump, even they voted against this provision that would have cut the military budget in a tiny, tiny amount. The Senate rejected an effort to ban the use of military equipment on Americans. And they're very hypocritical. Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi condemned what she called Trump's stormtroopers while also reauthorizing the Homeland Security budget without asking for any changes in how those people are deployed. The mayor of Chicago, also a Democrat, said she could work with these federal police forces in her city instead of opposing them. By the way, a couple of weeks ago, Trump told an interviewer, something's going to happen in Venezuela. I can't tell you what, but something's going to happen. So this declaration of war or additional sanctions, or once again claiming Maduro and his wife are drug dealers, another mercenary invasion attempt, we don't know because no one in the corporate media bothered to follow up. I only have a couple of minutes left. I want to talk briefly about some other Black Alliance for Peace police efforts. Black Alliance for Peace, we're not the Black Alliance for the Police, far from it. We have one of our groups in Baltimore has taken the lead in exposing something called Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is a Trump Justice Department program, which under the guise of fighting crime, increases surveillance in cities like Baltimore, Detroit, and Memphis. So we're talking about drone surveillance, aerial surveillance, cameras, all under the guise of fighting crime, which will in fact allow anyone in those cities to be tracked. By the way, I want to talk briefly about Joe Biden. I have no idea who's going to win the election in November. I do not believe the polls which say he's so far ahead of Trump. We were told the same thing about Hillary Clinton. But yesterday he said that Trump was the first racist president of the United States. Now, this was particularly funny to me because I wrote a book about racism in the presidency. And I joked on social media that there have been 45 racist presidents. And no, I don't exclude Obama. There have been 45 racist presidents. And if Biden wins, he will be number 46. Because, as we said, the role that the United States has played around the world in its aggressions against the global South, its aggressions against anyone who dares to try to advocate for their own sovereignty, to advocate for democracy in their countries, is inherently white supremacist. And so, yes, every president has been a white supremacist, and whoever wins in November will be one too. So I said I'd stick with my 20 minutes, and I believe I just did. So I thank you so much, and I'm now going to sit back and enjoy what Elle and others have to say. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Margaret. I watched a few of your videos, and the way that you explain everything so clearly, and the hypocrisy and the collusion between the Democrats and the Republicans, I'm just so thankful, and I learned so much. That was amazing, and so very well researched. And I also I really enjoyed the other videos on your website, Black Alliance for Peace. I also had the pleasure of being on a webinar with Ajamu, and he is a fantastic speaker as well. So I really encourage everyone to go to the website and follow them on Facebook and all that good stuff to keep active and updated on all of their great work. So I'm really excited to get on to our next featured speaker. We have quite a great lineup today. Our next speaker, this is the first time that I'm meeting her, but she was actually the recipient of the VOW Peace Award in, I believe, 2016. And she is a poet, educator, journalist, and advocate. She was the 5th Poet Laureate of Halifax and the 15th Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University. She is a 2016 recipient of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission Burnley Rocky Jones Award. She is also a co-founder of the Black Power Hour, a radio show developed collectively with prisoners. Her advocacy and work fights anti-Black racism in Canada, walking in the path of our great-grandmothers who resisted relentlessly. Her book of poetry and essays on state violence, Canada is So Polite, will be released in the winter from Gasparo Press. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce our next speaker, Elle Jones.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I apologize for my voice. I don't have COVID. I have communication in collective movements stress right now. So I'm sorry about my my voice and probably appearance. I'm very tired. I join you from Jabuktuk, so-called Halifax, in Mi'kma'ki, so-called Nova Scotia. This territory is unceded and unsurrendered by the Mi'kmaq people and governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1952. And we, of course, remember that when those treaties were signed with the British Crown, Black people across this globe were still enslaved. So even as we think about how we're all treaty people, we also have to think about how that partner, of course, the Crown, was also engaged in our enslavement at the same time. Before I begin my remarks, I do want to send greetings out to the prison hunger strikers at OCDC in Ottawa, who are fighting their unjust regime. I urge you to check out on CPAP on Twitter, Criminalization, Punishment, and Education Project, CPEP, which is following that strike. Among the demands of the prisoners are things like to not have violating strip searches done. Many of the women who are Indigenous women, who are of course so highly incarcerated, are speaking about their lack of access to cultural practices, being able to smudge, being able to just, have basic dignity. They're asking for food, healthy food. They're asking, for visits, to not be degraded on a daily basis. So do check that out. And there are also graphics and images on their Twitter and on their site, the noprisons.ca site, which will allow people to join that campaign in solidarity. I also want to acknowledge that yesterday, the safe third party agreement that Canada had with the United States was, officially canceled. So this idea that the US is a safe place, so refugees cannot be accepted into Canada who have landed in the US first. That is somewhat of a victory, but as we always say, somewhat not of a victory. No country is, of course, safe. Every country is part of global white supremacy. Every country is governed by militarism. Every country is a prison state. And these violences and these oppressions take place everywhere. And I know, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a Black man from the United States who tried to claim refugee status in Canada on the basis of police killings in the United States, making him less safe and claiming refuge in Canada. And while I, of course, fully support the free movement of Black people anywhere across this globe that Black people should want to be, we, of course, have to recognize that that was based on particular mythologies of Canada as some kind of refuge for Black people in safety that it never has been. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. Canada is also not so-called safe for refugees. We, of course, have a deportation regime, particularly to countries like Somalia, which we, of course, played a huge role in destabilizing and continue to take military action against, generating the refugees who we then attempt to deport back to Somalia when we feel that they are, insufficiently publicly safe, as we say. So I did want to acknowledge that. In talking about prisons, I actually do want to make that connection right now. In our defunding and abolition movements, those of us who are committed abolitionists understand that that is defunding and abolition of everything, because all of these state powers are intertwined. To give examples, our city council recently, after public pressure, canceled the purchase of what we call a tank, an armored vehicle. And so, of course, we recognize, for example, that the police are militarizing, and the militarization of police very much demonstrates not only military creep in the literal weaponization, the giving of surplus weapons, the growth of police having more and more weapons and spending more and more budgets on these weapons so they become more and more like soldiers. But of course, also the ideology of policing and militarization and punishment, which is shared across all these institutions. So beyond the actual practice, beyond the actual money, we understand that these are ideologies, and that our belief in punishment and policing is extended to our belief in so-called peacekeeping, our belief in so-called managing order. These come from the same roots. So we understand that the thinking is the same thinking. I have a friend who works in a women's prison in Pennsylvania. She doesn't work in there, that would be a misnomer. She goes in to teach philosophy to the women. And one of the things that she observes is that many of the people who work there are former vets. So people that have trauma from their actions, traumatizing people in Afghanistan, then coming and working in prisons and literally treating these women, mostly Black and brown women, as enemy combatants, and say things like, line up for dinner, bitches, just regularly refer to the women as bitches, regularly degrade them, and literally see these women now as the same enemy combatants that they see when they go into other countries and also degrade and rape and terrorize those populations as well. So we know that there's a direct relationship there. We know in cities like Halifax, which is highly militarized, that we also, of course, as a result, also have a heavy prison industrial complex and heavy criminalization. So Halifax, of course, as a port town, has a long history of enslavement economics. During the height of enslavement, at least 25% of Halifax's economy was devoted to the slave trade. Our merchants actually, of course, resisted the end of slavery because of the amount of money that was in slavery, and actually petitioned Parliament against the end of slavery because of the economic impacts that would have on them. We were the #1 suppliers of salt cod to the plantations in Haiti. And of course, we know of the Haitian Revolution, the world's first and only successful revolution that installed the world's first democratic constitution that declared rights for all women, men, and children, and declared everyone to be Black and equal, and summoned all Black people in the world to find freedom in Haiti, which still remains a beacon. And of course, Canada has subsequently played many roles in destabilizing Haiti, including leading the coup against Haiti in the early 2000s, and continues to support and destabilize the people's wishes and the people's support for favelas in the name of removing hospitals, removing schools, and of course trying to keep control over offshore oil, etc. So I raise these questions to just say that we recognize that these systems are intertwined, and as we fight particularly forth on defunding police and abolishing police, and we also talk about defunding and abolishing prisons, we also of course have to connect that to defunding and abolishing the military as well. We cannot have a militarized state and talk about removing prisons. And we of course understand that that is an act of gendered justice as well. I thank Tamara for very much raising the issues of climate change and understanding how that is so tied to this ongoing militarizing, this ongoing occupation, the ongoing theft of resources from people around the globe, the removal of Indigenous peoples from their lands, the genocide of Indigenous peoples that is ongoing to this day, including only in January, the removal of the grandmothers from Wet'suwet'en by the RCMP, the colonial police, who also, of course, basically enacted as a military throughout Canada's colonial history. There is not much difference or separation between Canada's military actions upon Indigenous people and so-called policing system. So, of course, many people forget that now after, COVID, it seems so long ago, but of course in January, Indigenous people in Canada were engaged in one of the largest Indigenous uprisings in history, the Shut Down Canada move, which was shutting down railroads, shutting down transport, recognizing that the removal of Wet'suwet'en grandmothers in the name of a pipeline to take oil to Asia was a grave injustice. So I just raise all those issues. And the final thing I say, I keep saying I'll get to something else and then coming to more points. So then I'll be 20 minutes. I'm like, I never even got to the other things, but that's fine. I also did want to connect through the move against monuments and statues. We know that recently our comrades in Toronto, BLM Toronto, that protesters there were arrested and held for over 12 hours, detained for so-called vandalizing these historical monuments of people like Egerton Ryerson, architect of the residential school system. You know, these slave masters, slave support, John A. Macdonald, of course, who integral in Canada's genocide of Indigenous people. So when people wonder what that connection is, of course, we recognize that these monuments to this militarization, to slavery, to colonialization are so deeply tied into our historical landscape. A few weeks ago, we held a colonial walk of our monuments downtown, including, you know, our monuments to the Boer War, which Halifax sent many, many troops to, and has a number of monuments commemorating as a result. Our monuments to the Métis Rebellion, where we sent out troops to suppress Riel and actually consider that a moment when Nova Scotia entered Canada. So the saying is that we went out Nova Scotians, we came back Canadians. And that Canadian citizenship is, of course, brought off the slaughter of Métis people and the suppression of that rebellion. We have monuments, of course, to all kinds of slave owners, you know, streets named after slave owners, Stairs Street named after William Stairs, who murdered over 1,000 people in Uganda in service of King Leopold. Who of course is infamous for the genocide of 10 million people in the Congo, a place where genocide continues to be committed for coltan and other minerals. And Canada, again, invested heavily in that, particularly through our mining companies, which are some of the most brutal institutions in the world, and continue to murder and kill people all over the globe, completely unaccountable. And every single attempt to place any ombudsman has been, by every government, not just Harper, but also Trudeau, completely met with, you know, people that don't even do anything. You know, there's multiple sexual assaults, multiple rapes, multiple disappearances, multiple deaths, multiple injuries that take place in this name. So when people wonder why at this time we're also talking about things like monuments must fall, we recognize that, again, this is about addressing this ideology of colonialism that still exists. All of that to now get to Canada and Africa and NATO. So I did want to cite, much as Margaret said in her remarks, it is, you know, a mistake to think of Trump as some kind of anomaly and then to tie all critiques of the United States into, well, Trump, 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 as if America only became unsafe under Trump, right? Oh, now we have to cancel third. America's always been safe, right? You know, only not now. When of course we recognize that Trump is simply perhaps the most vulgar expression of these things. In Canada, similarly, not only do we position ourselves against the United States and our constant "we're not like them" kind of rhetoric, even as we, for example, incarcerate children in immigration detention, and over 118 children are held in indefinite immigration detention in Canada, while we point, oh, Trump puts kids in cages. So we know that part of our psychology has always been to locate militarism, racism, prison systems as a phenomenon of the US, and we do something different. We know that is not true. We also know, of course, that in 2015, with the election of Trudeau, there is a Canadian fantasy similar to the hope and change Barack Obama fantasy that Trudeau would bring us back. As he famously said, we're back. And then, of course, we did not get a seat on the UN Security Council. Thank God. Yes, thank you for everybody who voted Canada out of the UN. And there was, of course, a big campaign run in Canada by activists who said, you know, if you, not that Ireland and Norway are perfect, but if you care about things like climate change, if you care about this globe, you should vote for Ireland and Norway to be on this council and not Canada. And part of Canada's rejection, of course, despite Trudeau's claims to a, quote, feminist foreign policy, unquote, which we were told that we were implementing. And that is, of course, very Canadian. Canada has, throughout history, phrased our violent interventions as peacekeeping, as we raped little boys in Somalia and tortured people and destabilized that government. We have always phrased it as the responsibility to protect, as though this is some kind of human rights service. We frequently phrase our interventions and destructions of other people's sovereignty as human rights missions. So in this name, Trudeau was attempting to restore Canada back into the Security Council. As I mentioned, we did not get that seat. Some of the reasons for that were, of course, as Margaret mentioned, Canada's complicity in the destabilization and coup in Venezuela through institutions like the Lima Group. Of course, Canada's history in Africa. Canada spent a lot of money lobbying in Africa, hoping that African countries would support us. But of course, not only our history in Somalia, our history of, for example, mining companies in Tanzania, where Barrick Gold murdered 65 people and injured hundreds more with no accountability. And we have done this all over the globe in South America, in Latin America, in Africa. Our mining companies have been completely unaccountable. Also, of course, I cite Canada's involvement in apartheid, not only the historic fact that when those who were engaging the apartheid regime in South Africa wanted to know how to do this, they visited Canada and visited our reserve system to study how we were controlling, disciplining, and genociding indigenous people, and transported that system into South Africa. But also, for example, that it took us until 1979 to end our favorable trade tariffs with South Africa, which we did not do because of our solidarity with the South African struggle, but because those tariffs actually favored South Africa. In 1982, we were part of a vote that actually allowed South Africa, we contributed almost 5% of a vote that allowed South Africa to apply for IMF money for like money that enabled that government to maintain. So we know that despite our pretensions now that we were such allies to Nelson Mandela, we in fact, of course, opposed the apartheid regime. And as all the global powers have continued to oppose any move to actual freedom and liberation in South Africa, because anybody who believes that South Africa is now liberated has not been paying attention to what is happening in South Africa, where white people own more land than ever. And there is now, of course, a push, particularly by economic freedom fighters and other young parties, to actually win liberation, to repossess the land, allow people to actually share in that and fulfill some of the dreams of the Freedom Charter and the will of the people, to nationalize mining companies and all of that. And Canada, like all these Western powers, is, of course, a complete obstacle to the actual liberation of Black people. The final comrade, Andrew Mlenga, just passed, who was the last of the Rohingya 8, Rivonia 8, sorry, the Rivonia 8 who were arrested with Mandela. And I noted the BBC article cited he forgave his captors, as though that is the most important thing Black people can do, rather than getting freedom and liberation for ourselves. I also, of course, want to cite Canada's continued lack of support for human rights in Palestine. Canada has voted against every single resolution brought forward, whereas Ireland and Norway, for example, have supported them, a number of them. Canada remains one of the most stalwart defenders of Israel, including prayer breakfasts on Parliament Hill. Our so-called left parties have, of course, never supported Palestinian rights and have, in fact, kicked people out of the party or removed candidates who have spoken up for Palestinian rights. Most recently, Rana Zaman in Nova Scotia, who was removed from the NDP seat, she was voted in to run for the NDP and then was removed for her comments in solidarity with Palestine. So, and then a human rights reward was also stripped from her as well. So all of these things went into why we should not sit on the Security Council and why we are not a beacon of human rights in the world. Not that the Security Council should exist, period. So it's not that I'm like, you know, yay, Security Council. I'm just saying we certainly shouldn't be on it, never mind that it should exist, but at least international rebuke to our pretensions of peacekeeping. Saudi Arabia, of course, we sell multiple weapons to. Syria, we were involved in destabilizing. It goes on and on and on. I did also want to cite Canada's sending of 600 Special Forces troops in 2017 into Africa. So Canada continues to militarize the African continent and cite this again as some kind of useful policy. The last two things I'm going to say, I did also want to talk about one of the campaigns we did briefly. So, and this is tied to the connection of things like criminalization, deportation, and militarization. I wanted to cite the case of Abdul Abdi, a young Somali refugee who was brought to Nova Scotia as a government refugee, was taken into permanent foster care, into the child welfare system. Canada did not, the province did not get a citizenship for him, and then attempted to deport him to Somalia. And of course, as I mentioned, the influx of refugees from Somalia is of course due to Canada's actions, among other actions, in completely destabilizing Somalia in the name of stealing the oil and fish off, you know, the shores of Somalia, which continues to this day. And then when you defend yourself, you're a pirate, right? So we fought that deportation. And I just raise this to say that these kind of connections are at the heart of many of our liberation movements. We need to understand that Black lives cannot be liberated while Africa is under global control. We are not free until Africa is free. People in the globe do not believe that, including many African and Black people ourselves do not believe in the capabilities of Africans to seek freedom. So that case very much was about the implications of Canada in these global networks of violence, and then the violence we do upon the bodies of young people, of children, of Black kids, of Black bodies, that then when we are tired of them, we dispose of them in the name of public safety. So Canada is certainly not safe. I don't know if I think that was all my comments. I don't know if you have time for a quick poem. I do have to jump off this webinar as well because I have to go on another webinar. Such is COVID life, where now everyone discovered webinars and now we are just webinaring our ways through everything. This poem is about women in war, so I thought to just close with some gender analysis. We are, of course, speaking from a feminist lens with voices of women and recognizing the particular impacts of war that create sexual violence, the ongoing rape of Indigenous women in Canada, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls directly tied to colonial violence and militarization and violence that continues. So I will do this poem and then I will have to like jump out. So thank you so much to the goddess Margaret Kimberley, who I admire so much. We were so glad to have in Halifax. Thank you so much to the Voice of Women for all your work in, you know, the hard road of the peace movement, which has been so abandoned by the left. In everything else we talk about, there seems to have been no will, and Black Alliance for Peace talks about this as well. We as the left movement so rarely challenge the notion of militarization and war. There are no peace parties that run. We have entire elections where no one once mentions barely anything about foreign policy, and certainly nobody talks about addressing military policy. And we know that war is anti-feminist. You cannot be a feminist and believe in any kind of militarization. Having women generals is not an act of feminist victory. War impacts women. So anyway, I will do this poem. We women have marched pregnant and given birth in bushes beside roadways, carried the children on our backs through trails of tears and evacuations. And when the babies died, we used the milk remaining to sustain the starving falling to the side until our breasts dried up. Our battle cries have so often been lullabies to hasten dying eyes. And so often without complaining, we have been the sacrifice in wars decided where we were denied the chance to even have a vote. We are parched throats and bloated bodies littering the roads. Our monthly blood has stopped from exhaustion and stress. We are found where we drop with mothers arched over the bodies of the little ones with holes punched through their chests. We mothers have always given our lives in protection, stepped in front of bullets, or like women in Vietnamese villages, witness offering their bodies to save their mother or daughter from rape. War takes more from women than tales of battlefield glory will ever relate. Nobody writes heroic poems or plays about what we women endure, while the men create heroic victory. Our stories of front lines and trenches ignore the women made prostitutes, the forced abortions, infections, the devastation left in the wake of battles they put on the monuments. There are no ornaments or engraved plaques for women so often left in mass graves. And though we are not the cause of war, we are left out of peace negotiations. We have lived the Cheyenne saying that a nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground. But we have found well springs of bravery to sustain us. We women have saved where we can and rationed the bread, so often foregoing our own portion. We are survivors looking ahead to times of peace. We have imagined worlds run by women where conflict would cease, like the women in Kenya who founded their own village, Umoja, meaning unity, after being rejected by their husbands for being violated by soldiers. Creating their own economies and families, continuing to teach and keep the homestead running, raising the children in bomb craters, wallpapering over the halls in the kitchen left by missiles, and sitting down unbeaten to cups of tea. We have grieved our husbands and sons and gone to work in factories and jobs unappreciated once the fighting was done. We have sewed back on the amputated limb and been dismissed as only nurses. We have caught all the diseases. We have seen the worst and been the first to enlist and been the last to receive services until still to this day they have doubted our purpose. And still we continue to work the shifts. We have typed the lists and brought the coffee to the generals and been hissed and cursed as collaborators when we couldn't resist the enemy's advances. We women have done the dirty work, taken chances on spy missions, positioned inside enemy lines to send radio transmissions, the Cree women risking their lives as code talkers whispering. We have driven the trucks and fixed the transmissions, performed the maintenance and filled the planes with gas, and listened to the words of dying men as we held their hands, kissed them, and offered them comfort as they passed. And we have marched on and outlasted, like the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, continuing to hunt for missing children kidnapped or born in detention. And did I mention the South African freedom fighter, tortured and kicked in the belly, who sang as she gave birth to her daughter in her cell? I can tell you that we women have killed and been killed, burned off the land and forced against our will. Often it has been the men on our own side who have betrayed us. And still we have built resilient communities like Queen Nanny, organizing Maroons in the hills of Jamaica, the spirit of Harriet Tubman, Moses, also known as the general, holding a shotgun to temple and saying dead men tell no tales. We are those countless trips through hostile territory. They said on rage she was silent as a snake's tail. Yes, we have been ruthless in the quest to win our freedom, so often succeeding where men have failed. We have visionaries like Joan of Arc, leading the French army as a girl of 13, believing we received messages from holy voices, and we have been burned at the fiery stake when the battle turned. We are Anne Frank writing in her diary because so often we women have fought with words to bear witness to atrocity. We have made the hard choices, like Queen Nzinga, poisoning her own brothers to protect her people against the colonizers. We are warrior goddesses divine like Kali, Mama Oya, and Athena, and we've disguised ourselves as men like Mulan in China, or like the indigenous women in the Canadian Army in World War II, hiding their race to serve the same country that denied them their rights. Some were survivors of residential schools and still signed up to fight. Women like Mary Gray, eyes wearing her ancestry with pride. We are women whose history has been silenced. We are the invisible but defiant. We are the peacemakers who have learned the art of compromise, and the queens who led the uprising, in chariots swift as wind rising, guiding our people in wise counsel from roundhouses and mountaintops, even cut off our breasts like Amazon so we could better direct our aim. We have carried our sword in the right hand and our baby in the left, or did you forget that we women are known as the stronger sex? And through the effects of war, we women have endured, restoring order, righting wrongs, bringing a brighter future by singing our new peaceful songs. Thank you, everybody. I do have to jump off. I will see you later. I'm sorry to run. This is brilliant. Thank you. Everybody do support the actions tomorrow, and I will see you soon, I hope. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, everybody.
Wow, thank you, Elle. And I can see people clapping in all of the views. That was incredible. And I think people, yes, I think everyone can understand why she is an award-winning poet and receiver of our VOW Peace Award. That was incredible. And all of the information that she gave us on our Canadian delusions of peace and security. And I really appreciate the highlighting Canada's mining actions abroad. Canada is home to the most international mining corporations. They're registered in Canada. And when I traveled to Tanzania, I was actually warned because of the Barrick gold mine to not tell people that I was Canadian. Because they have been pushed off their ancestral lands. And when I traveled to the region where the mine was, I talked with the teachers there, and they said that when the mine empties the tailings, they only get about 30% attendance in schools because the children are out in the tailings looking for little scraps of gold because it is a billion-dollar gold mine in Tanzania. You know, on roads that get incredibly worn out, and schools terribly underfunded. So I really want to say a special thanks for highlighting Canada's mining actions around the world. They are horrendous. And I want to introduce our final speaker. She is incredible. She is new to the team, and we are so thankful to have her. Her name is Ashwini, and we have been lucky enough to have her on the team now for about 3 weeks, I think. She will correct me, but she has done an amazing job on all of our social media, and she also has other initiatives like COVID-19 Perspectives. And she has a few remarks and a poem as well. We have been blessed today with art. So Ashwini, would you mind unmuting yourself and coming on?
So much, Vanessa. Hi everyone, I hope you all are doing well. And before I begin, I would just like to extend my warmest thank you to Tamara, Margaret, and Elle, who has just left, because the remarks you have made today have been so wonderful and much needed. And especially speaking from a youth perspective, I think it's really great how I was able to take away and learn so much from what was said here today. So thank you for providing us with this space and this platform for us to listen and really engage with this important information. So as Vanessa just said, I am a more recent member to WOW. I joined nearly a month ago, and I joined because I was really interested in seeing how youth can get more involved with peace mobilization and peace education. And just everything that I've learned and taken away so far has been so valuable to not only my own personal growth and self-learning, but helping to craft an environment where I think youth can also become more involved and invested towards these important efforts and peace education pieces that we are talking about. So on that note, today I will just be reading a short poem entitled The Call to Allyship, The Dream of Peace. It relates some of the themes that we've discussed today, such as NATO, themes of racism, and how we can work towards nonviolence and sustainability. The intent of my poem was written for the youth audience, but I thought it was important to reflect here as well, so we can all hopefully take away from it. So without further ado, I'll begin. The Call to Allyship, The Dream of Peace. How do we envision peace? For nonviolence and sustainability, we dream. We rise and say no to NATO. We are a collective force, and they will not silence this scream. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO for short, poses various risks and a challenge to well-being, captured by the destabilizing and destructive impact of nuclear weapons. Setting back the cause of peace and nuclear disarmament is what we are seeing. Collectively, this statement has become a rallying cry, a march. We are called amongst the streets. Outstretched arms beg for nonviolence and an end to racial injustices. Outstretched arms beg for a chance to breathe. For not only do discussions of NATO contaminate our air, but its involvement in deadly viruses of climate change and the racism which continues to extinguish Black lives. Yet, how do we revolutionize this partnership in the pandemic and talk about the pandemic of racism and police brutality which also survives? I asked myself, what can I do as a youth to play my part? I questioned, how can I contribute to this tangible change? So I decided to learn more about the 4 steps to allyship. I decided to contribute to this new chapter to turn the page. First comes action, showing support and solidarity within communities, recognizing the need to amplify the Black voice. To be an active ally, we must listen to the experiences of these people, to understand their stories and their choice. The second L in ally, it stands for learning, educating ourselves on the Indigenous and Black communities' persistent fight, as well as linkages between structures of police brutality and NATO. We must work together to eliminate these structures of oppression from our sight. This change starts with me, to first reflect on my own positionality which stands, to speak out, say no to NATO, pertinent racism and injustices, and remember Canada's own biases and implications at hand. AFRICOM is the colonization of Africa by the US and its partners, so we must work to reassess indicators of security and stability in the state. For the growing presence of NATO and involvement in AFRICOM do not favor well for the welfare of Africa's fate. So today, we are all here to educate ourselves and to learn, listening simply to hear. Today, we stand in solidarity and commit to change, whether we are far or near. Thank you, everyone, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A that's to come.
Thank you so much, Ashwini, and thank you for all of your efforts. Ashwini was the one who started our Spotlight Mondays, where you can see bios of all of our amazing new team members. So we are going to close close to 8 o'clock, maybe 8:05. And we're going to have the Q&A now, and we'll just have just a couple minutes of short remarks on our upcoming campaigns afterwards. So if anybody has any questions, I didn't see any in the chat, so I'm wondering if anybody wants to raise their hand or any questions. We can start. Okay, no questions. She answered all of your questions in one go. That's impressive.
Did I see, Catherine, did you have your hand up?
All right, thank you. Nice to see you, Margaret, and everyone. This has been wonderful. My question is for Margaret, what is the key for you to organize? What has been the key in terms of organizing?
You mean in successful organizing? We have to be in solidarity with other people. We can't do these things alone. We have to find committed groups of like-minded people and organize and struggle together. And sometimes you have to struggle amongst a group in order to get things done, but there's too much emphasis, I know in the US, too much emphasis on individual action and people, going it alone. It's just the opposite. Any deed that's any accomplishments that's of any significant for good or ill is done in a group. So we have to learn to be in solidarity with each other. And that means to help each other, and it means to be honest with each other. All of those things are important in organizing, and not to miss the most basic thing, hard work and consistency. You have to, we all have lives, it's not easy. We all have things to do. We all have families, friendships, all kinds of things, day jobs, everything. But in this process, we have to be committed and find other people who are equally committed, and just keep pressing through, which can be scary, because you know, the state is not playing around. They have dropped the hammer on people who have, someone in New York vandalized during a demonstration, vandalized an already vandalized police car, and the feds are making them face years, possibly years in jail. Things can be tough. We are the ones who are censored. All this talk about, what is it, cancel culture. It's people on the left who get censored. We are the ones who are excluded. We are the ones that the media never talks to. We are the ones who are left to work together to try to educate the public, while the corporate media continue to be stenographers for the people in power. So I think I went off on a little tangent there at the end, but I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you. A little love helps too, right?
Well, isn't that what Che said? Che Guevara said, revolutionaries have to be full of love, right? I'm misquoting, I know. But anyway, I think if somebody else knows, put it in the chat, because I think I messed it up.
Always in the heart. And I see, Liz, you have a question in the chat, but you can, you're also unmuted. So if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful lineup, and for all the work that all the speakers do and all of you do. My question is around, you know, this is such a particular and special time in our world, with the COVID and with the Black Lives Matter, and with this huge militarization and the expansion of NATO that Tamara's been talking about. So the question is around how do we get the public to be more aware of the racism that is inherent in, for example, the Five Eyes network, which is, you know, white, English-speaking sort of supremacist colonial background, that we're part of it.
Well, I think people have to know there is such a thing as a Five Eyes. You know, I wonder how many people in our country, where are you from, by the way? I was trying to figure out your accent.
I'm in New Zealand, Aotearoa.
Oh, you're in New Zealand. Oh, aha, you're the one on, I don't know what time it is there. Thanks for joining us.
It's the middle of the day.
It's what?
Middle of the day.
Oh, okay, good. First of all, how many people know that there is a Five Eyes? I think we have, you know, we do have an uphill struggle in teaching people about things, information that's quite deliberately kept from them. So I think in the case of an issue like that, let's start with the basics. Did you know there's such a thing as the Five Eyes? And they work together very closely. In Canada, in Australia, a man who's a parliamentarian in the New South Wales Parliament, because he likes China, he's been to China, he advocates for better relations with China, and this elected official, respected person, had his home raided, his computers taken, someone called the media so they could photograph this, just to make sure that everybody got the message that there's a rhetorical war on China, as some of them want to have hot war on China. And I am sure that the United States cooked that up. It is quite real, the way these intelligence agencies work together, the fact that Australia does not defend Julian Assange, their citizen, that they put their relationship with the US first, the fact that the US connived to overthrow an Australian prime minister in an allegedly democratic country. So we just have to start by speaking the truth. And that can be uncomfortable because a lot of people don't like to hear these things, but we have to forge ahead anyway.
All right, Liz, I think I saw that you mouthed thank you. So thank you, Margaret, for taking Liz's question. And thank you, Liz, for tuning in all the way around the world there.
You're welcome. I think we have to acknowledge, first of all, there are limits to electoral politics. There's limits to what governments do. They're not set up to do the things that we here tonight want them to do. It's people power that we need. It's people power that brings about change, sustained activism and organizing. That's the hard reality. And I'm not telling you, what to do or not do in your career plans, but people here talk about, for example, can we reform the Democratic Party? We can change them from within. They don't want to change. So if you're involved with them, it should be with the knowledge that that's the case. They don't want to change. Why should they reform when they think they're just fine? They don't care if they lose to Trump. They don't care if they lose seats to Republicans. They don't care. So I think we have to, and I think it's hard when you're always told you live in a democracy. It's a democracy, it's a democracy. And you are given the impression that you can make a system do what it does not want to do, what it is not intended to do. So we have to work for revolutionary change. That's a scary thought and a scary word, but that's where our energies must be spent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Monica, for the question, and thank you for that powerful message at the end. That's a great note to end the official webinar, but we do have just a few quick announcements because tomorrow is a very exciting day for us, but we did want to make sure that we ended on time. But if you can, please stick around and just listen and watch Tamara as she explains our National Day of Action tomorrow.
Well, hi, everyone. We'll just be another couple of minutes and then we'll end our webinar. I want to tell you about some really important upcoming events that the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace is organizing and leading and sponsoring. So tomorrow is our National Day of Action Against Fighters' Threats, Strike for Climate Peace. We're going to be outside of members of Parliament's office across the country. I'm encouraging you to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @BowPeace, and find out more information on our Facebook page and like us on Facebook. It's Bow Peace there. And then you can see our website with lots of resources and articles and handouts. And we also have a petition that we're hoping that you can share. I want to show you this great graphic. It's a map of all of the actions that are taking place tomorrow. So we are trying to stop the Canadian government from spending $19 billion on buying a new fleet of fighter jets. We need to stop this procurement, and we instead need to invest in climate action, affordable housing, healthcare, and education. So we really need your help. If you can't join us in person outside a member of Parliament's office, please take a selfie and with a sign that says "Strike for Climate Peace, no new fighter jets," post it on your social media accounts, and we will and use the hashtag climate peace, no new fighter jets, and we will find it and we will share it. And you can also send the image to us on email. It's info@bowpeace.org. I also want to let you know that the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace is part of the Hiroshima Day Coalition, and we are helping to organize this fantastic webinar, 75 Years, Canada, Nuclear Weapons, and the UN Ban Treaty. We have two fantastic nuclear disarmament activists who are going to be speaking, Setsuko Thurlow and Phyllis Creighton. So please be sure to go to the website hiroshimadaycoalition.ca that you can see on your screen and join the webinar. We also want to tell you about this campaign we have to prevent the Canadian Navy from participating in RIMPAC. You can find more information on our website. And again, we have a petition that we hope you will sign and share. And then please mark your calendars, because June 2021, we are having a major national peace conference, Divest, Disarm, Demilitarize, and it's also going to be timed with a huge protest to shut down CANSEC, the largest weapons fair in North America. So we hope that you will get involved in Peace Work in Canada. We really need your support. You can find out more on our Facebook and on our website, and we also encourage you to join our great monthly e-newsletter, and you can send us an email with your email address, and we will be happy to put you on our newsletter. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating in our webinar this evening, and I'll turn it over to Vanessa now to end it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamara, for the update on all of our campaigns. We are very busy recently, and I'd like to thank all of the new team members and the board members and Tamara, everyone who has made this possible and who continue to support and help our peace activism and our reach for social justice and a better future for all. I think this will be my final comment. I just hope that we can find each other in this, stick together, come with love, and make it better for all. So I'm so happy. This was so great. Thank you to everyone. And
thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Elle. Thank you, Ashwini. Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one.